All right. Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. And in fact, not only will I be the host, I'll also be the speaker for today's event. So those who are new to Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, we're all about bringing science, adventure, exploration, and conservation live into classrooms across North America and beyond. Since schools have closed, we've been broadcasting all of our events live into the homes of parents, students, and educators all across North America. So if you go to exploringbytheseat.com, you can find that we're running 3 to 4 live events a day. So you can find all kinds of great connections with scientists, explorers, and the like. So do check out the website and tune into some more of our events. In fact, today at 1 o'clock Eastern, we have a National Geographic event. We'll be going live in Patagonia to a remote area where we'll have a scientist rappelling down a waterfall and looking for new species of insects. So that's really cool. You can check that out. But that one will be on the National Geographic Education YouTube page if you want to check that one out. All right. Well, as I said before, my name's Joe, and I'm the founder of Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. And I also like to scuba dive around the world. So I'm an explorer with National Geographic Society. And whenever I get a chance, I like to suit up, jump into the water. Doesn't matter if it's freshwater, doesn't matter if it's saltwater in the ocean, and explore. So what I want to do today is take you on a little adventure, take you on a little trip around the world to some of the places I've been diving, show you some really cool marine life, some really cool shipwrecks. I've got some gear here with me I can show you today if there's time. And then of course, I'd love to take some of your questions. So I'm going to jump to a share screen right now. Let's get that going. Bring up a PowerPoint here. There it is. And I'm going to take it full screen. Just let me know if for some reason it doesn't go full screen for you, but it should go now. And I might just have to swap displays. I think that's good. If one of the teachers turns on their mic, just let me know if it's not full screen. I can swap the screen, but I think it should be full screen now. So I have been diving since 2007. In 2007, I moved to Australia for a year, and it was one of the best years of my life. I got to work all around Australia and travel, and I got to start doing some diving. So this is a picture from the first time I ever went scuba diving. This is on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Great Barrier Reef and why it's special in a moment. But I guess I feel pretty lucky that someone was there to take a picture of my first time ever diving. Oops, there we go. Here's a scuba selfie. This was a few years later in a place called Cozumel. This is a tiny island off the coast of Mexico. Sometimes when I jump into the water, I don't bring all my scuba gear, my tank and stuff like that. I just do something called free diving, where I just pull on my mask and my snorkel, and then I jump in and see what I can find. So this is actually a lake in Australia called Lake Mackenzie on Fraser Island, the world's largest sand island. And I dove down 30 feet deep, and the bottom was covered in these little turtles, these freshwater turtles. I brought one up for a closer look, and then of course I let it go back to the bottom. And sometimes you can do really fun and silly things when you're scuba diving. So this is a sport that I invented. I call it scuba cycling. I don't know if it's going to catch on, but sometimes you find garbage in lakes, and here's someone had thrown a bike into this lake. So I tried riding the bike, and it is not easy to ride a bike with scuba gear and flippers. I can tell you that. So I said I'd talk to you a little bit about the Great Barrier Reef. So the Great Barrier Reef is the largest living structure on the planet. It stretches for over 2,000 kilometers along the coast of Australia, along the coast of Queensland. But it's not just one big reef. It's over 3,000 reefs and 900 islands make up this big, long chain that runs along the coast of Australia. It's the only structure created by living things you can see from space, but it's actually made up of tiny little creatures called polyps, coral polyps, about this big. If you can see my little screen, they're very tiny creatures, but over tens of thousands of years, they can build massive structures. So the inside is dead. It's old, kind of fossilized skeletons of the reef in the past. It's the outer layer of the coral reef that's alive. And so this is what it looks like on top of the ocean. And then when you dive in, it looks really cool. As you can see, it's a whole new world. Here's a black-tip reef shark cruising by. And I'm sure this question will come up. Don't you ever get scared of scuba diving with sharks? And the answer to that is easy. No, I love scuba diving with sharks. And it's actually a very lucky time when the shark sticks around long enough to get a picture. Usually they take one look at this weird creature, breathing bubbles, and they take off. So it's lucky when you get a picture of them. These are parrotfish. This is a school of parrotfish. They get their name because they've got these beaks like a parrot. And when you're diving or you're snorkeling on the coral reef, you hear a lot of crunching, crunch, 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 crunch. And that's the sound of these parrotfish taking nibbles off of the coral. And then I might wreck beaches for you, but those nice white sandy beaches that you visit in places like Mexico and the Caribbean and such, all of that sand likely passed through a parrotfish. They munch the coral, and whatever they can't eat, they poop it out, and it's sand. So that sand that they eat winds up on the shores, making those nice white sandy beaches. Oops. All right. How many have seen Finding Nemo or Finding Dory? I bet you everybody has. These are two clownfish living in a sea anemone. So they've got special mucus on their skin so they don't get stung by the tentacles. And it's a nice safe spot for them to dart into when predators come around, because predators will get stung by the tentacles on these sea anemones. Here we have a giant clam. So if you've ever been in a lake and found a clam, they're not very big. They're usually only a few inches across. Well, this one, if you have a meter stick or a yardstick that you've seen in your classroom, stretch your arms out. That's how big that giant clam was. Huge, about a meter in length. Here's a green sea turtle. You can see the beautiful colors of the coral reef in the background. And then this sea turtle does not look green, does it? There's 7 species of sea turtles. They're all threatened or endangered. And the green sea turtle gets its name because of what they eat. They eat a ton of algae. They eat a ton of seagrass, and that turns their fat inside their body green. If you could look inside this sea turtle, you'd see that it has green fat on the inside. Here's a blue spotted stingray. Sometimes people call them flat sharks. They're in the same family as sharks. They're related to sharks. They have cartilage instead of bones, just like sharks. And then they have a nice little stinger at the base of their tail. So a stingray would never chase you and try to sting you. That's there for self-defense. If a predator tries to eat it, or if you step on a stingray that's under the sand by accident, then you'll probably get a good little sting from the barb on its tail. And that's kind of right where its body, right there where the body kind of meets the tail. Now, when you're diving, you have to look for the small stuff. It's really great to see big fish and big sharks and things like that, sea turtles, but the small stuff is really cool as well. So if you look around really closely on the coral reef, you can find all kinds of amazing sea life. And here's a beautiful example. This is a nudibranch, and nudibranch gets their name. It means naked lungs. So it kind of looks like a little sea slug, beautiful colors. They come in all kinds of different varieties, different frills, different colors. And that color signifies that they're not good to eat. They're toxic. But then if you look at the back, all these little frills here, this is how they grab oxygen from the water. So nudibranch means naked lungs because their lungs, how they breathe, is on the outside of their body. So that's pretty cool. This is a cuttlefish. So it's kind of like a cross between an octopus and a squid. Cuttlefish are really cool. They can be up to a meter long, and they're super curious. They love to come up and look at divers. And the really big ones sometimes will snatch your regulator. That's the part you breathe with. They'll grab it right out of your mouth. And it's not because they want to hurt you. It's because they're really curious and trying to figure out what that thing is. So here's another cool picture of a cuttlefish here hovering over some seaweed. This is one of the most dangerous creatures on the reef. Now, normally, if I weren't shining a light on it, you wouldn't be able to see it. It has beautiful camouflage. It blends in with the rocks. It's called a stonefish. However, if a predator finds it and tries to eat it, it's got spikes on its back, and those contain venom, and it's very, very toxic. So you have to be very careful where you put your hands on the coral reef. In fact, you shouldn't touch the reef at all, just in case one of these stonefish is camouflaging and you don't see it. So another place that I want to visit is a group of islands in the Pacific called Fiji. Beautiful, beautiful spot with some beautiful diving and, of course, lots of sharks. So here's a white-tip reef shark. You can see it cruising through. And if you look in the corner of this picture, there's a fish photobombing the white-tip reef shark in this one. Oops. Here's a picture of some sharks cruising over top. It's really neat to see the way they silhouette against the sky. And they have counter shading, which is really cool. So counter shading means they're dark on top. So if you're looking down at them, they kind of blend in with the sea floor, and they're white on their belly. So if you look up, they kind of blend in with the sky. So that counter shading is a way that the sharks can kind of blend into their environment. Here's a really cool pair of fish here. These are called blennies. You can see that they look exactly alike and they moved exactly the same as well. So again, when you get really low to the bottom and you really look carefully, you can find some amazing tiny life in the ocean that is just as cool as the really big life that you see. So I want to take you to Cozumel now. So Cozumel is here, little tiny island off the coast of Mexico. A beautiful place to dive. It's a lot of fun because when you dive, you feel like Superman. There's an ocean current that moves along the island the whole time. So you can jump in, sink down, and then you don't have to kick at all. You can just spread your arms out and it feels like you're flying over the reef as you move with the current. So this is an example of one of the dive boats that I go out in. So this flag here is a dive flag. When this flag is on a boat, it means other boats need to stay away because there's divers in the water. They have to be careful. And then we load up our gear here on the back. We get all geared up and then we jump off the back. We take a giant step off the back when we get to our dive site. Again, looking in things, looking around can pay off. So this is a sea sponge. So sea sponges are pretty cool just in general. They're animals, but they're animals that have no eyes, no brain, no heart, no mouth. Instead, they filter feed bacteria and other small particles out of the water. They suck the water in, absorb the bacteria and other materials, and pump the water back out. So one of the weirdest animals you can find on the planet with no brain, eyes, heart. Pretty awesome. But inside this one's this arrow crab. Beautiful, beautiful arrow crab. Super curious. You can see it's reaching out with one leg towards the camera, trying to figure out just what I am looking down at it. At the base of all the reefs in Cozumel are these beautiful caves. So you can swim through these great swim throughs, these great caves, about 100 feet down. Really neat to check out. There's a couple divers in front of me as they make their way through the caves. There's another shot there, kind of demonstrating that. And then peeking in the cracks and crevices, you never know what you're going to find. Here's a beautiful snowflake moray eel. And you can see it's not too happy that I found it, but I took a nice picture and then I left it alone. Here's a nurse shark. So nurse sharks are really cool. They're nocturnal. They're usually hanging around the bottom during the day, resting. A lot of sharks can't do this. They have to swim constantly to keep water moving over their gills. But the nurse shark and a few other bottom dwelling species can pump water over their gills so they can rest during the day like this. And then at night they come out to hunt. And they like to eat things off the bottom. So they don't really have teeth. They have plates that they use to grind up things like shrimp and crabs and hard shells that have creatures inside that they like to eat. A beautiful school of yellowtail fish here hanging out on the coral. Another example of amazing camouflage on the coral reef, we have this stingray. And this stingray, you can barely see it outlined at the bottom. It blends in beautifully with its environment, and it can do even better. Had I not caught it in time to get this picture, it would have shaken its little fins here back and forth and knocked some more rocks on top of it. And all you would see is these two tiny little eyes poking out from the bottom. Now, this is a species called the splendid toadfish, and they're special in Cozumel because they're only found around the island of Cozumel. They're found nowhere else in the world. And when animals are found nowhere else in the world except one spot, they get a special name called endemic. So endemic is just a fancy way of saying you can only find this animal in one spot on the entire planet. This is a different species of sea turtle now. This is a Hawksbill Sea Turtle. And you can see it's got kind of more of a jagged shell at the back. It's got a little bill here, kind of like the beak, a little hook, like a hawk, and that's where it gets its name from. And then you can see here, this isn't as nice and colorful as some of the other pictures I showed you. And that's because the deeper you go in the water, the more we lose our colors. So light is broken up into different colors. It has different wavelengths, and it can only penetrate so far into the water. So you lose your reds and your oranges and your yellows first until you get down deep enough that you only get the blue reaching that far. And eventually none of the light can reach any further. And you enter the dark, the midnight zone where no light can reach. So how do you fix this? Well, a lot of divers have flashes, big strobe lights on their camera, and that brings light down with them. So it flashes on the creature they're taking a picture of, and that can bring the color back. Here's a baby Hawksbill Sea Turtle. This one is about the size of a dinner plate as it cruised along the bottom. And then my favorite dive in Cozumel was we waited till it got dark. The sun went down, we went out on the boat, and then we jumped in the water with just our flashlights. And we sank down into the dark, dark water, and the night crew was out. So the animals that are out during the day find spots to tuck themselves safely away on the reef, and out come the nocturnal animals like the lobsters. Here, if you look carefully, you can see a nurse shark just disappearing outside of my spotlight, of my light, cruising through, hunting on the reef. And then the best part of all was the octopus that come out at night, and they crawl around the reef. They change colors. They pounce on little crabs, little fish to eat. And believe it or not, this is one octopus here that I was following. Look at the way it changes its shape in each picture. Look at the way it can change its color to try and blend into the surroundings. Really neat to follow this octopus along the bottom. This is my light here, and I wanted to show all these little worms that just love the light. So there's this cloud of these little worm-like creatures all around the front of my dive light. And a couple more pictures in Mexico. This is a green moray coming out to smile for the camera. I'm sure you've all heard of a pufferfish. So this is what a pufferfish looks like when it's relaxed and just swimming in the water. But when pufferfish are threatened, they suck in a bunch of water and they turn into a nice little ball like here when they fill up with water, and that makes their spikes stand up. So imagine if you were a shark. You would not want to eat that. That would not feel good in your mouth. So that's a great defense that the pufferfish have. And then they can empty that water when they feel safe and then go back to their normal size. Here's a couple more stingrays. So I want to take you into freshwater now. So this is in the Great Lakes. Some of you may live near the Great Lakes, like Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, Lake Superior. And you may not find as much life. You see fish, of course. But what's really special is for hundreds and hundreds of years, people have been shipping things through the Great Lakes, and thousands of ships have sunk in storms, in fog, and things like that. So you can dive on these incredible shipwrecks in the Great Lakes. So this is a shipwreck here called the Forest City, and that's me right there. You can see we're making our way down the side of a shipwreck here. You can see the wooden walls of the wreck there and the planks. Here's another picture, and this light right here, that's me right there in that picture with some divers as we go down this shipwreck. And here we are at the stern of the shipwreck. We're 155 feet deep here. This is the back of the shipwreck called the Forest City. There's another picture of what it looks like from the back. And so it's kind of sitting on a hill in the water. So it's 155 feet deep at the end, and at the front, it's about 60 feet deep. And this went down in fog, I believe, ran aground and then sank. Another important thing about diving is you always dive with a buddy. So you always have one other person with you, and they're your buddy. You look out for each other. If something's wrong, you help your buddy any way you can. You get back to the surface together. If something goes wrong with your buddy's air, you have an extra regulator with this nice yellow hose here you can give to them so that you guys can get back to the surface safely together. So big important safety rule of diving is always dive with a buddy. So that's me. And this day I was diving with someone named Rich. Here's another beautiful wreck. It looks kind of like a pirate ship. This is the Arabia, about 117 feet deep. And there's the wheel, the ship's wheel of the Arabia. And one more shipwreck I want to show you. This is off the coast of North Carolina. So I think we have a group from North Carolina joining us today. This is off Moorhead City, about 30 feet off the coast. This is U-352, a German U-boat, a submarine that was depth charged and sunk by the Coast Guard during World War II in 1942. So this was an amazing wreck to dive on, to come down the line and see a submarine at the bottom of the ocean. Last place I want to take you today is Bimini in the Bahamas. So off the coast of Florida, beautiful tiny group of islands. And here is a stingray. This stingray has a name. Her name is the Blanket. And in the next picture, you'll see why she gets the name the Blanket. So this is me in the water. This is my wife, Liz. And then this is my little guy, Finn. He was 2 at the time. And this is the blanket living up to her name. Look at the way she's covering my legs. Super friendly. Wondering if I have any fish or anything with me. Really big stingray. We visited the shark lab in Bimini. So we're here in these pens where they catch these young baby sharks. They put a tag on them so they can check on them when they're older. They take samples of their blood so they know who they're related to, and they can learn other things about the sharks, and then they release them back into the wild. So this is a lemon shark, and they get that name because they kind of have a little bit of a yellowish tinge, and their skin kind of looks like the skin of a lemon when you look really close. And there's Finn again. Finn sitting here at the back, sitting on a little floaty as we're looking at these little baby sharks. We swam with some Caribbean reef sharks. So we put a little bit of fish into the water and then jumped in, and we're surrounded by 15 of these beautiful Caribbean reef sharks as they swam around us. And we got to take some great pictures and video. But the real reason I went to Bimini was to see the hammerhead sharks. Great hammerhead sharks, 10 to 12 feet long, so twice as tall as me, the big ones. And we spent 6 hours in the water at the bottom over 2 days, hanging out with the hammerhead sharks, getting great pictures. They swam really close. So much fun. Here's another picture of one swimming over. Look at how they smile for the camera. Here's rush hour in Bimini. We've got 3 of them cruising by in this picture. And then here's another one swimming over top, another nice smile for the camera picture. Really cool to be able to swim in the water with these sharks. And in fact, I've got a little video that I'm going to share with you here that I took. So let me switch over here to YouTube. Let's go full screen and let's take a little watch. You can see all along the bottom, those are nurse sharks sitting in front of us. And then the hammerheads come in one by one. Here comes a nice big one. And sometimes they get really close, like this one. Really, really cool. All right, let's come back from that screen share and check the time. All right, so what I want to do now is share just a couple quick little pieces of gear with you so you can get an idea of what I put on before I jump into the water. So let's see, what should we start with? First of all, this is pretty important. Doesn't look very special, but this is weight. So believe it or not, even with a scuba tank on your back and all your gear, when you jump into the water, you don't sink to the bottom right away. You have to put extra weight. Sometimes I have to put 20 pounds of weight into my scuba gear before I'll sink to the bottom, especially in salt water, because salt water makes you more buoyant. It makes you float more. So this is an 8-pound weight, and it goes inside of the vest that I wear. So sometimes I have to put up to 20 pounds of this heavy lead weight onto my gear before I can sink to the bottom. I've got my tank here I can show you. So this is one of the tanks that I use. You can see here. This goes on my back. So imagine taking the air, after this call, go into your bathroom and imagine taking the air in your bathroom, squeezing it into a space the size of this tank. That's what happens when I get my tank ready to go underwater. That's why I can stay under for about an hour on most dives. So I can take the air in a regular sized bathroom and squeeze it down into here. And then listen, you can hear how the air is compressed. So that air is packed really tight, and then it likes to come out. Now, how does it come out? Here's my regulator. This attaches to the tank. This is what I use to breathe underwater. And then I told you there was this yellow one. We call it an octo or an octopus. And this is a backup one. If my dive buddy's in trouble, I can give this over to them, and then they can use it to breathe underwater, and we can go back to the surface safely together. So this is mine that I use. This bright yellow one is for my dive buddy if they get into trouble. And then when I'm underwater, I need to know what's going on around me. So this gauge here tells me how much air is in my tank. This gauge here, oh, I got it backwards. That tells me how deep I am. This one tells me how much air is in my tank. And then underwater, it's easy to get lost. So I've got a compass here that I can use to take bearings and figure out where I am underwater, how far I am from where I started. Always carry a little light with me, like this one, so I can look inside of crevices and see what's around me. If I'm diving at night, then I bring this big one, this big spotlight, and I can use that to light up the area in front of me so I can see where I'm going. A few other little pieces of gear, pretty darn important. Here's my mask so I can see what's going on underwater. And then I love to take pictures. So I have a few different cameras, but here's an example of one. So this is just a regular camera, nothing special, but I put it inside of this case, inside of this housing. And then I can take it underwater with me. It stays safe and dry, and then I can get some pictures and video with it as well. And one more piece of gear I want to show you. And I always take this with me when I dive. This is my dive knife. And the reason I take it is not because I'm scared of sharks or sea creatures, but there's fish nets underwater, there's fishing lines underwater. And if you were to get tangled up in one, you can be in big trouble. So you need to have something to be able to cut yourself free if you get tangled up in a net. So that's a little bit of gear that I wanted to show you. And now I would love to take some questions. Any questions are fair game about scuba diving, about sea creatures, about our ocean. I would love to take some of your questions. So you can raise your hand on the side for me. I'll keep an eye out for that. As well, anybody who happens to be tuning in on YouTube today, feel free to use the chat sidebar to send me some questions, and I will watch for those as well. So let me just open that as well so I can see both of them right now. There we go. Perfect. So let's get going. Let's start off with Emma and Kat. They're joining us in North Carolina. Let's turn their microphone on. How are we doing today?
Good.
Awesome. Thanks for hanging out today. What'd you think?
I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, you want to try scuba diving in North Carolina? It's a pretty cool spot. Lots of shipwrecks, sand-tooth sharks, lots of good stuff in your water.
I have a huge shark tooth.
Oh, very cool. They do lose those teeth and you can find them. They wash up on shore. So that's pretty lucky. So what's your question? You have a question for me? You want me to come back? I can come back.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. I'll come back. I'll remember. We're going to visit Miss Erickson in Stafford Springs, Connecticut. Some of her classes tuning in online. Oops, where'd she go? There she is. Miss Erickson, if you don't mind unmuting, then I'll grab a question for you or from you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I have Susanna from Stafford Elementary School she wonders, how many types of sharks did you find during your dives?
All right. Great question. I love diving with sharks. Big ones, small ones, doesn't matter. Everything in between. So a few species I've been able to dive with: black tip reef sharks, white tip reef sharks, gray reef sharks, nurse sharks, the Great Hammerhead sharks, blind sharks, Port Jackson sharks. Who else? I know I'm missing a few. I'll have to have a little think about it, but at least 10 species of sharks. Bull sharks is another species. The Caribbean reef sharks, there's another group. So at least 10 different species of sharks. And it depends on, the stingrays are related. Sometimes people call them flat sharks, but I don't count them as exactly sharks. They're quite a bit different, but they are in the same group of elasmobranchs is this fancy name for them. So about 10 different species of sharks. I see Julian has his hand raised. Julian, if you want to unmute, go ahead and ask a question.
What's the coolest ship you've seen?
The coolest ship that okay. Well, that is a pretty easy one. In the ocean, I would go with that German submarine for two reasons. One, it was really hard to get to. We had to go out on the boat for over 25 miles. So the land was long gone, disappeared in the background. We went down 118 feet. There was a really strong ocean current. So you had to be a really good diver and somebody who trains a lot to be able to do a dive like that. And then I got to swim all around a submarine. So that was definitely one of the coolest ones I've been on. If I had to pick one from freshwater, from the Great Lakes, I would pick a wreck called the Wexford. And the Wexford went down in 1913. It's over 200 feet long, a big freighter that used to carry materials around the Great Lakes. And you can swim right inside of the ship and from the front all the way to the back, swimming through the different corridors and rooms in the ship. So that's definitely some of my favorite wrecks that I've been able to check out. So I see a couple of questions from online. One is from Sophia. She's 10, and she's wondering if you're still allowed to dive during the pandemic. And the answer to that is it depends. It depends on if your dive shops are open. If your dive shops are open and you can safely get a tank filled, then you can absolutely do something called shore diving. So shore diving is just where you pull up somewhere, like a river or a lake or next to the ocean, put your gear on, walk into the water, and start diving. A lot of boats, though, a lot of boat and tour operators won't be open, so you can't really dive that way. If you own your own boat, if you're lucky, you could do it that way. You could definitely still dive during the pandemic. It just depends on if a shop near you is open and if you have a spot you can go on the shore or your own boat. That makes it a lot easier. Let's see. How long have I been diving? So since 2007, I've been diving, so over 10 years now. This is from Kohlberg, Mrs. Langer's group. And then how would you get started? Well, anybody who's tuning in, I've got good news for you. If you're 10 years old, you can go to a dive shop and you can start learning how to scuba dive. So it takes a little bit of time. You have to take an in-class part where you learn about the science behind diving and what to do if you're in trouble and things like that. Although you can do that online on a computer now, which is pretty cool. Then you go out to a swimming pool with a dive instructor, and you have to do 5 lessons in the pool where you learn everything from putting on your gear, what to do in an emergency, all kinds of things like that. And then after that, you have to do another group of dives, this time in open water. So that means in a lake or a river or the ocean. After you do 4 or 5 of those dives, then you can get your scuba certification and you can dive all over the world. And then really smart divers, they train every year. They learn how to dive deeper. They learn how to use new gear. They learn how to dive in different situations. You can get all kinds of different certifications and collect them to grow and become an even better diver. So just like you learn in school, when you become a scuba diver, you keep learning as well. Okay, so I can see another hand up here. Let me unmute this microphone. Actually, you're gonna have to do it for me. I know it's not Melanie, but it's listed as Melanie. If you want to unmute your microphone and introduce yourself and then ask me a question.
What is the? My name is Luca, and what is the rarest animal that you found while you were diving?
Oh, the rarest. Well, that splendid toadfish that I showed you is pretty rare because you can only find them in one spot. Another animal, so if you have time to look online today, look up leafy or weedy sea dragon. They are super cool. They're similar to seahorses, beautiful camouflage, really hard to spot while you're diving. But I was diving in a place called Shell Harbour off the coast of Australia and was able to see a sea dragon. So look them up on Google afterwards. Such cool creatures, beautiful camouflage. So really lucky when you get to see one of those. And there's lots of rare creatures in the ocean. There's some species like the sawfish, which is a type of shark, or angel sharks, that there's only a few of the species that are left. They're really, really rare. But I think those are 2 good examples. The sea dragon and that splendid toadfish are 2 rare creatures I've been able to see. So I know a few are raising their hands because they didn't find the button. So I see Tiber joining. Do you want to unmute for me, Tiber? I saw your hand up a second ago.
Just a second. Let me get off the chat. Okay, why would you get tangled up because you had the diving flag on? Wouldn't they know not to throw the fishing net there?
That's a really good question. So it's not fishing net or fish line that comes while you're diving. It's stuff that was left behind. So when people fish, nets get snagged sometimes. They get caught on things and the fishermen lose them or have to leave them behind. Or when people are fishing and it gets snagged, your fishing line gets snagged on a rock or a shipwreck and breaks, then it's just down there. So it's not stuff people are throwing in the water while I'm diving. It's stuff that's been left in the water. And then those nets cause a lot of trouble, something called ghost fishing. So even though the nets have been lost by humans, whether they were thrown away intentionally or they drifted away or got caught, those nets still catch sea creatures, fish, sea turtles, stingrays, and such. And then those creatures that get caught in those nets usually end up dying. So it's called ghost fishing when the fishing net is in the water and still catching sea life. So that's a big problem. And we hosted an event not too long ago with a group in the UK. They're called Ghost Fishing United Kingdom. That's over in England. And they go out on the weekends, big teams, and they dive around different wrecks and they find those ghost nets and they bring them up to the surface. So they get them out of the water so they can't cause any more harm. All right. Let's see. We got a shark question. I am going to get to that shark question shortly because it's a good one. But let's turn on. I see Miss Erickson's group has another question. So if you want to turn on your mic, Miss Erickson, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So I have Talon would like to know, how do you get air inside your tank? How do you refill it? And we also want to know, how long does it stay with air in it? How long can you dive with the tank?
All right, good questions. So let's start attacking those questions. So where I get my air fills is dive shops. And so dive shops have these special compressors where they can take air and they can compress it down and then they put it into your tank for you. So you can see my tank here, this little top part right there. So that is hooked up to the tank and they can pump that compressed air into my tank. And then I can use it underwater. So when I take it underwater, it depends on the type of dive, how long the air will last. If I'm diving in really warm, shallow water and I'm not moving a lot, I've had a tank last for an hour and a half while I'm underwater. If I'm in deep, cold water, then your body's working harder because of the cold water. The air compresses more because you're deep. There's more pressure pushing on it. Then that's more like 45 minutes a tank will last. Some divers, especially when they're new, they're nervous, they panic, and sometimes they can breathe through a tank in less than 20 minutes. So it also depends on your experience level. The more experienced you are, the more relaxed and calm you are in the water, the longer your tank can last for you. So I know there's students in the call. I'm going to scan through the videos. Let me go to gallery view. Give me a wave at the camera if you couldn't find your hand and you have a question that you want to ask. Give me a wave and I'll know to come and pick at your spot. There's Kai. Kai, do you want to turn? Let me see if I can turn your mic on. Nope. Kai, can you turn it on for me?
How much weight? Well, how do you know how much weight to put on in different?
Good question. Good question. There's actually a formula and it has to do with your weight and it has to do with the type of water that you're diving in. If it's in fresh water, you don't need as much. You sink easier. But in salt water, all that salt in the water makes you more buoyant. It makes you float a little bit more. So you have to use more weight. So there was a question in the chat about, well, if you put weight on, how do you get back to the surface? And I want to show you right now how you do that. I've got another piece of gear here. This is pretty important. This is called my BCD, or my buoyancy compensating device. So you can see here, there's a spot where the tank goes on the back. There's different spots here to clip different pieces of my gear and different hoses. There's pockets on the side, like this one. And that's where I put my weight inside of. Then I put it on just like a vest. And this here is pretty darn important. This lets me put air in the vest and fill it up like a life jacket, which can help me change my weight, my buoyancy in the water. And it can also let air out and help me sink. So how I get back to the surface with a lot of weight on is I can slowly add a little bit of air through here into my vest, which can help me and my buoyancy when I'm in the water. All right, I saw David had his hand up. So David, let's get that mic on. Hey, David.
How much does your gear weigh altogether?
Well, I guess if I add 20 pounds for the weight and my tank could be maybe another 10 to 15 pounds. I don't know, I'd say my gear altogether, probably somewhere between 30 to 40 pounds worth of extra gear that I wear before I jump into the water. I didn't show you my flippers as well. Here's my flippers. These are pretty darn important. Split fins, they help me move through the water. They just slide on the back here. And there's other pieces of gear as well. But I'd say somewhere between 30 to 40 pounds, depending on the dive that I'm on, how much extra weight that I have on me. So I see Emma and Kat in North Carolina have their hand up again. You guys have a question?
I have one.
Go for it.
What has been your considered most lucky dive?
My most lucky dive. Huh. Well, I guess my most lucky dive. I don't know. I think my first shipwreck was pretty special. I'd only just learned how to dive a few weeks before, and then I was in Fiji and then got to dive on a ship that was 80 feet deep called the Salamander. So that was pretty cool. And then going all around the ship, there was all kinds of really small things to find, little pipe fish that look like little seahorses. So that was pretty special. I thought that was pretty cool. Another special dive. They're all pretty unique. Something different happens on all of them. But I guess the hammerheads, spending 6 hours with the hammerheads was pretty special. Something so big that so many people are scared of. But in actuality, you know, you're more in danger from toasters and falling out of chairs or lightning or vending machines than you are from sharks. So sharks get a bad reputation. You know, think of how many people swim in the ocean every year. Millions of people each day swim in the ocean. And in a whole year, maybe about 100 people get bit by a shark and 5 to 7 people die from being bit by a shark. Now flip that to the other side. Every year we remove about 75 to 100 million sharks from our ocean, either by accident. When we catch them, it's called bycatch. If we catch them by accident while fishing, or caught on purpose to cut their fins off to make something called shark fin soup, which is a delicacy in a lot of Asian countries. So I don't know. I think sharks have a lot more to fear from us than we do of them. Many shark populations are down 90%. 90% of their populations have disappeared because of the way we have overhunted and overfished them over periods of time. So I think sharks need to be a little bit afraid of us and maybe not so much the other way around. All right, so David's tuning in on YouTube and David's wondering about how dangerous it is diving with sharks. And I think we just talked a little bit about that, but in actuality, not very dangerous at all, especially if you just keep your distance and respect the shark space. And then there's different times of day, you know, early morning or towards the evening as the sun's setting. Those are times that sharks like to hunt. So if you're in murky water, you know, really murky water when the sun is rising or setting, then I guess there could be a little bit of a risk, because most of the times that sharks bite people, it's a case of mistaken identity. So imagine you're a shark and you're looking up, you're swimming at the bottom and you're looking up for the outline of a sea turtle, for the outline of a seal. Somebody on a surfboard looks a lot like the outline of a seal or a sea turtle, especially in murky water. So when the shark takes a bite, they call that an exploratory bite. Sharks don't have hands like us. If a shark wants to figure out what something is, it has to use its mouth. It doesn't have hands. When it does bite, say, a surfer or a swimmer at the surface, those people usually get back to shore. And that's because the shark realizes this is not my normal type of food, and they leave. Unfortunately, though, a big shark, you know, people do tend to pass away from loss of blood. So maybe 5 to 7 people a year, maybe 100 people bitten on the whole planet. But then think of the hundreds of millions of times people swim in the ocean every single day. Let's see. Is there anybody who hasn't asked a question who wants to, who hasn't had a chance? You can turn your mic on now. We still have a couple minutes. Turn your mic on if you have not had a chance to ask a question. Otherwise, I can go back to a couple hands that I see up already. Okay, Julian, go ahead. Turn your mic back on.
Have you ever swam with a great white shark?
I have not, but I sure would like to. Many people know great white sharks can be up to 21 feet. They're big, strong, powerful ocean predators. They can migrate for thousands of miles. They hunt things like sea lions. And a lot of people are afraid of them, but I know a lot of people, scientists who work with them and study them. They put tags on them so they can track them by satellite as they move around the world. I even know a guy, his name's William, and he can hold his breath for 9 minutes. 9 minutes, that's pretty incredible. He's a free diver, and he has some world records as well. And what he does is he dives in the water, just him with his flippers, with the great white sharks. And he goes down, he has a special harpoon gun that doesn't shoot harpoons, but instead it can put a satellite tag on the shark's fin. So he dives down next to these big great white sharks and he pops a tag right on their fin, and then they can be tracked by satellite. So if I ever get the chance, I would love to scuba dive with a great white shark because I think they're really cool. Okay, maybe we can squeeze one. Okay, Kai, go ahead.
What's the longest dive you've ever done?
Longest dive was in Bimini. It was an hour and a half, which was awesome. And the only reason that could happen was because it was shallow, warm water, and we didn't have to move a lot. The hammerhead sharks were coming to us. So the hammerhead sharks were doing all the work, and we just got to sit back and check them out. Tiber, go ahead. I know you have another question.
What was it?
Do you want me to come back?
Yeah.
Okay. Emma and Kat, we'll take one more from you in North Carolina, and then we'll think about wrapping things up.
How many dives have
I done? Great question. Probably close to 200 now. I'd have to check my dive log. So that's another thing that divers do is they keep a log. They keep a log of all the dives that they do around the world, who their dive buddy was, how deep it was, what the water temperature was, what creatures we saw. So I used to, do I have it down here? I think my dive log's upstairs. So I used to have it on all written in pages. I used to write after every single one, but now on one of my old phones, I have a dive log that I just keep on one of my old phones. So it's not a phone anymore. I just use it for an electronic dive log. So I can look back at all the dives that I've done in different places. There's one more good question online that I want to get to. And this is wondering about, do the tags hurt the sharks? They don't. So they go into their fin. If you squeeze your ear, everybody squeeze your ear right here, right here, or right here on your nose, that's made of cartilage. And that's what sharks, their body's made of, is cartilage. So just like people get their ears pierced, that's kind of what it feels like for a shark. So they might feel just a little bit of a like a pin or a sharp feeling when it first goes on, but after that, they don't feel it anymore. They don't have many sensors, many receptors in those fins. It's all cartilage. So just like your ears, right? The hard material in your ears, that's what a shark's fin and its body. No bones in a shark. And then Tyra, I'll give you one more shot if you remember your question, bud.
I remember it. Did you ever see a whale?
Good question. And the answer is yes. Lots of times. So usually humpback whales, sometimes gray whales when I dive in California. So that is another really special spot that I was in recently in California, diving in kelp forests. So imagine a forest underwater. It's the second fastest growing plant. If you watch kelp long enough, you can see it grow. That's how fast kelp grows. And 30, 40 feet tall, this underwater forest of kelp full of all kinds of different creatures. I got to swim with harbor seals, sea otters, those little nudibranchs, all different kinds and colors, all kinds of crabs and other creatures. So that was a pretty special dives in the kelp forest. Yeah. So, sorry, Tyra, I started talking about kelp forest and I lost track of your question. What was your question again, bud?
Did you ever see a whale?
Oh, yeah. We were talking about whales and then I went to kelp forests. So humpback whales, yeah, but only from the boat as we were going out on the dives. I haven't been lucky enough to be in the water at the right time. But in Australia, when I was underwater, I could hear the humpback whales singing. So that was really awesome to be able to hear them singing like that. I hope one day to be in the water with the humpback whale, places like Tonga, places like Hawaii. There are opportunities to dive with the whales. And of course, you just have to be respectful. Just keep your distance. Don't make them feel crowded. If they want to come close to you, make it the whale's choice, not your choice. All right. Well, a shout out to everybody who tuned in on YouTube today. Thanks for hanging out and learning a little bit about some cool sea creatures and the diving that I like to do around the world. Thanks to Mrs. Reynolds' class who joined us today, Ms. Erickson's group who joined us live today as well, and all the students who are live on the call. Thanks for your great questions. And I hope if you're not 10 yet, that you're thinking about learning how to scuba dive when you hit 10. And I hope if you are 10, that you're ready and thinking about getting underwater, because it is a whole new world to explore, right? If I walk through a forest, I might see some birds, some bugs. I might see a rabbit or a deer running away from me because they're scared. But when you go underwater, you are surrounded by hundreds, if not thousands of sea creatures who just accept you as part of the environment. So I highly recommend learning how to dive and exploring a really cool world on our planet. We've got better pictures, better maps of the moon, better maps of Mars than we do of our ocean, of our deep sea. So lots to explore, lots to see. And maybe some of you can become marine biologists and take on that job of exploring our oceans and finding out what's in there. So thanks so much for everyone for joining today. And we look forward to seeing you on another Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. Thanks, everyone.